Sure, man. So yeah, my name's Nick. I'm the CEO of Factory Labs, and we build DAO infrastructure. So yeah, we're trying to build a framework for human collaboration, and we're building a set of modular dApps and an execution framework that we think will take DAOs into the sort of their next phase.
Killer. Can't wait to hear about it. So I'm going to throw your slides up, and I'm going to step down. If you need me, just let me know.
Perfect. Thanks. So yeah, I'll get straight stuck in. I'm going to talk about prediction market DAOs and AI, and what I think is a really interesting concept that's yet to be fully realized, and that is futarchy and how we get there. So for about 10 minutes, I'm going to give you a sort of rapid tour of where we're at with these things. So I'm going to start with prediction markets, talk a little bit about collective intelligence. I'm going to show you an example of a prediction market that we've built and how we think we can take that to on-chain reputation, and what DAOs are going to bring to this sort of mix. And finally, now AIs are coming to maturity. How are they going to play into this and take us to some of these really interesting collective intelligence concepts? So prediction markets is something I've been fascinated with for many years. They've been around for quite a long time now. They were first proposed by Robin Hanson about 23 years ago. So this long predates crypto. And they were initially presented as a means to improve decision-making in organizations, which is a little bit different to how we've seen them realized up to this point, which has been largely a kind of betting market type construct. They're originally designed to be a governance idea. And the principle is that, markets being massive open consensus engines, like if you want to know what the world thinks of Bitcoin right now, you just need to look at the price. So markets have this really interesting dynamic of being a consensus system themselves. And the idea of prediction markets is that we can build market dynamics into a means of aggregating information and what people's perceptions are on things. So prediction markets are a way to basically hone in attention through incentives on particular issues and get people to put skin in the game, put a market price on what they think is going to happen. This kind of touches on what I think is certainly one of the things that brought me into the DAO space. I was a learning theorist for many years as an academic. And collective intelligence is this idea that if we can somehow find mechanisms for aggregating massive diverse ideas and thoughts, it's potentially better than what is possible with an individual mind, or even through what you could do in a company, for example. So collective intelligence is basically an emergent property of social complex systems. It's always there, but it's not all that useful all the time. I often say crowds aren't wise, but there is collective intelligence in them. And it's a fascinating subject that cuts across social cognition theory, mechanism design, this idea of wisdom of the crowd, swarm intelligence, and ultimately democracy and social consensus systems. So what is futarchy and why is it interesting? So this is when prediction markets connect to this idea of governance. Can we make better decisions if we integrate markets into our processes, into the way that we make decisions, given that they can aggregate this massive amount of collective intelligence? And the paper that Robin Hanson wrote was vote on values and bet on beliefs. So this is the idea that we can generate our values through kind of democratic means. And then when it comes to should we make these decisions, they go to a market and we see what the market thinks is a good idea or is the best idea. What I find really interesting about this is it kind of unifies moral and social consensus of democratic systems with the efficiency and informational accuracy of a market system. So it kind of brings humanity back to the markets in a very real way. Now, these are things that were really, they're in the Ethereum white paper. They were very much part of the early Ethereum law, Gnosis, Augur, first dApps on the Ethereum mainnet near enough. But it's incredibly difficult. And since then, we've not really realized them. So what are the limitations? Well, it kind of assumes that the people with the most money make the best decisions, which we know isn't always the case. We've basically had one real prediction market in 20 years. And that was the 2020 Trump-Biden election. And it was amazing. It actually really outperformed the statisticians and the people commenting on the elections. But the issue was they're quite rare that they bootstrap enough liquidity to get real market consensus. So the order book model really doesn't work because you can set a market up for any idea. So if any idea can be a market, then everyone sets up different ideas and it fractures liquidity. That plus real regulatory uncertainty around these things, moral hazards, people worry about things like assassination markets and various other things that these could potentially be used for. And they're difficult, confusing, and overtly plutocratic. So I'm going to sort of quickly present our take on this. It's debatably a prediction market. We call it a cryptoeconomic game. It's called finance.vote. And instead of taking binary decisions, typically a prediction market is this event going to happen, yes or no? We give a bunch of realities, essentially. In this case, we give people a basket of market assets, and we allow people to quadratically vote on them, essentially ordering a list of what they think is going to happen. And we use soulbound tokens as identities. And basically the history of people's predictions gets attested to their identity. And you get this perfectly on-chain history of how an identity has performed over time. Now, we don't use a centralized order book. We're much more like Uniswap, where we have an AMM type thing, where we use a pari-mutuel pool. And we use a network token to provide liquidity. So there's always a bet to be taken, and you're not waiting for a counterparty. So we've been running this for quite some time, and we've got some really interesting data that not many people have seen yet. But interestingly, and this hints to the crowds aren't necessarily wise thing, but there is market alpha in this system. If you put $100 each into our 10 market assets, you would have hit one of these lower lines where you basically hit market beta. The market went up about 3x in that time. But if you voted, or if you bet, if sort of went all in on the least voted for and the least predicted item, you would have 10x'd your portfolio. So actually there is signal in this, but it's essentially you're counter trading the people in there to get it. So where do DAOs come into this thing? And this is where I'm sort of really interested in this. So DAOs now, they're very early. Most DAOs that we sometimes call DAOs aren't actually DAOs, which kind of gives the overall sort of idea a sort of bad name. But ultimately, they live in a kind of trilemma between decentralization, autonomy, and organization. And that sort of means that, if you aren't decentralized, you're not really a DAO. So where I think this goes is that we get towards on-chain reputation. So we can take the history of predictions, assign them to a digital identity, and then assign reputation factors to these things and amplify the predictive power of those with a history of good prediction history. So that's what I think will create these cybernetic feedback loops, where we can essentially amplify the signal in the collective intelligence. And I think this might be where we discover on-chain meritocracy. So where do DAOs come in? Well, DAOs basically need to manage some of these games. There's prediction equilibria. So we found an equilibria where essentially counter trading generates market alpha. That might be temporary. So it needs to be a dynamic equilibrium, and we're going to need to amplify different voices at different times, and DAOs, I think, will be ideal for that. And ultimately, this is where we start to unify the governance space to generate futarchy. So DAOs essentially are social consensus systems, and this is where we will vote on our values to decide what we want to take to a prediction. And ultimately, we can use DAOs as an oracle itself to move away from market prices to basically anything. I think AI is potentially the missing piece. This plot on the right here is essentially the mind of a DAO. So this is using our app Influence and the Factory DAO suite, which is essentially these nodes are identities and ideas or values. And this generates what I call an opinion graph. And this is basically the mind of a DAO. And this is perfect information for fine-tuning AIs, which is what we're doing at the moment. And essentially, this will allow us to tease out the collective intelligence from the crowd by tuning reputation factors and giving attention to the best predictors. So yes, I think this puts us on the road to futarchy. We're moving into a space where we've got maturing reputation-based prediction markets. So finance.vote is a reputation-based prediction market rather than an entirely plutocratic system that allows us to dial up and dial down particular voices in the prediction. And really the best agents to be able to make those judgments will be AIs. They'll be able to synthesize the sort of massive amounts of data and all the complexity in the system, and it is a complex adaptive system. And AIs will be able to essentially adjust reputations dynamically. And essentially, governance is going to connect with prediction markets, which is where we're going to in the next year. And I think we'll get AI representatives where we'll be able to input, say, the mind of 1,000 people into a data set and generate an AI representative that genuinely represents those people. And NFT governance is the way to do it. In that sense, you'll be able to have an NFT or an SBT and alter people's power and influence in a DAO purely through an on-chain meritocracy mechanism. And ultimately, I think we end up with a kind of human-machine hybrid collective intelligence, which could get us looking into the future, but ultimately, I think will generate us entirely new forms of governance, which could have serious impact in the real world. So yeah, these are the apps that we are using to do this with. We've built a suite of applications that we think are what DAOs need to be able to do these kind of new and elaborate governance mechanisms. And yeah, you can contact me on Telegram at @DrNickA or follow Factory DAO at FactDAO or finance.vote on X, as it's now called. And that's it from me.
This is great. This is really fascinating stuff. We'll take some questions, but I've left your slides up because I would like to ask if you can maybe go to that graph that you showed us and maybe point out some of the like interesting inflection points where the two like counter predicting started to diverge.
This one. So so basically what this is, we've got a basket of assets, which are essentially, they were a basket of DeFi assets at the time. So things like YFI, Maker token. And essentially what we've got here is a weighted consensus. So essentially the DAO or the predictors are weighting this basket of tokens every day. And essentially what you've got at the bottom here is essentially just a random walk. So if you just do pure randomness, you sort of lose money. The further up this you get, you're weighting into the prediction. And actually the way to make the most money is to pick the absolute bottom asset that everyone listed to. So all in pessimist is putting all your into the least voted asset each week for a year. And that generated you 10x alpha on your initial portfolio.
That is really fascinating. Yeah, if anyone wants to ask a question in the chat, please write it down. I'll read it out loud and also put it on screen. We have about a minute, so maybe something I'm curious if you see a future for is like AI delegation, like where I'm specifically saying I think you touched on this a little bit, but yeah, I'd just like to hear like how you arrived at that idea, because it's something that we at Valory used as a proof of concept, and so I think we have some alignment there.
Nice. Yeah, so I absolutely believe like governance apathy is a huge problem in the DAO space. It's unreasonable to expect people to constantly be tuned in to DAO governance behavior. So yeah, we're trying to essentially generate this opinion graph, which is essentially, again, generated from mixed methods data, qualitative and quantitative data from our voting system. And yeah, we think this can, via a LoRa type fine-tuning mechanism, can generate, say, a chatbot that could write proposals on behalf of the DAO. It literally synthesizes the attitudes and opinions and preferences of everyone. And ultimately, this will move to a kind of executive kind of agent that simply says, I think you'll want this. And people say no if they don't. And if they do it, just the proposals just start sailing through. So yeah, we're doing this with actual political data next year, and we're going to run a sort of political experiment with Londoners to sort of capture what they think the issues around the London mayoral election. But yeah, ultimately, I think DAO agents, DAO representatives is probably where the DAO space is going to go.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you're right on with that. Cool. Well, thank you very much. I hope you have time to stick around for our open QA, because I do have a great question from Andrew, which I don't have time to because it's time to bring up our next presenter. But thank you very much for joining us today.
I'll be there.
Cool.